Welcome to Modern Psychedelics, where we explore the transformations made possible through intentional engagement with psychedelics. This podcast will help you integrate high consciousness living into the everyday and deepen the work ignited by altered states. You can expect balanced and grounded conversations around therapeutic, ceremonial, and recreational containers. My name is Lana Pribic, your host and guide. I am a 3-time certified professional life coach, and I work with people who want to integrate higher levels of consciousness into their daily lives so they can feel more peace, fulfillment, and connection. After all, our time here on Earth is so brief, so let's make sure we're really living. The song you hear is called Lost Horizon by Peace Sign. All right, let's journey. Hello and welcome to episode 119 of the podcast. So grateful to have you here. If you're new and you're just finding this episode because of Juliana, welcome. My name is Lana, and in this podcast, we explore the intersection of psychedelics, personal development, and growth. It's a pleasure to have you here, and I hope that you enjoy some of the other almost 120 episodes that we have on the show, including guest interviews and insights from myself around how to really make the most out of your psychedelic path. In today's episode, I am bringing you Juliana Mulligan, whose name might sound familiar to you, especially if you've tuned into the recent Joe Rogan podcast with Rick Perry and Brian Hubbard, who discussed all things Ibogaine treatment in the United States and bringing that to a mainstream medical system. Her name was dropped, and it is the most listened to podcast in the world. So today, we are honored to welcome Juliana Mulligan to the show. Juliana is a psychotherapist, harm reduction advocate, and someone whose personal journey with Ibogaine shaped the way that she works with people struggling with substance dependence. In 2011, she herself underwent Ibogaine treatment to leave opiates behind, and in doing so, set off on a path to transform the way drug users and their treatments are approached. She shares the story of her tragic near-death experience with Ibogaine and how, despite the fact that she almost died during treatment, she was left absolutely baffled and in awe of Ibogaine's ability to cease her withdrawal symptoms. It gave her so much hope, and she has really held on to that hope since 2011 and is continuing to just be a total trailblazer in the Iboga and Ibogaine world. Over the last 12 years, which pretty much makes her a vet in the modern psychedelic space. Yeah, she has worked in multiple Ibogaine clinics, was the psychedelic program coordinator for the Center of Optimal Living in New York City, and she served as a consultant for the Kentucky Ibogaine Initiative. She currently runs Inner Visions Ibogaine, offering preparation and integration support for those who are considering Ibogaine or Iboga treatment, as well as consulting services for projects in the field. She's also the more recent founder of iDreama, the world's first Ibogaine treatment training and certification program, which is really aiming to bring safety, ethics, and much needed accountability into the space. Juliana's expertise has been widely recognized. She's presented at psychedelic and harm reduction conferences, authored the guide to finding a safe Ibogaine clinic, and she also co-authored Fireside's warning signs when selecting a psychedelic facilitators. Her insights have been featured in publications like the New York Times, Rolling Stone, National Geographic, Chacruna, and Double Blind magazine. And beyond her amazing accolades and credentials, Juliana's lived experience is really what makes her such an important voice in the conversation around Ibogaine. She knows firsthand what it's like to navigate opioid dependence, incarceration, and the pitfalls of the traditional recovery model, not to mention the dangers of the Ibogaine field and space in being largely, and we're going to really dive into that in this episode. We definitely go beyond the basics of Ibogaine and Iboga. So if you're looking on a crash course or an introduction on what Ibogaine or Iboga are, I would recommend just searching Iboga in my podcast catalog and looking at the episode that I have with Levi Barker. That's a really good introduction into Iboga. Just a little bit of primer for those who are just tuning in and not really sure about the difference. Iboga is a shrub that grows in the Central West Africa region, and it is a visionary highly psychoactive, psychedelic, ancient plant medicine. And the medicine is actually in the root bark of the Tabernathe Iboga shrub. Now, Ibogaine is one of the many alkaloids that are found in the Iboga shrub. So think of Iboga as the cannabis plant and Ibogaine as CBD or THC, which has been extracted from the plant. So, this episode, like I mentioned, it's far beyond the surface, and we really get into some real conversations about these medicines, the gaps in the Ibogaine treatment world, major ethics and safety issues that need to be addressed. We discuss some recent deaths in the Iboga and Ibogaine space, and Juliana shares her vision for training the next generation of responsible Ibogaine providers. We also talk about why this space tends to be a little more tricky to navigate than other plant medicines, including that a lot of formerly opiate dependent people are serving this medicine, the challenges that come along with that, but also the sheer safety profile of Iboga and the fact that one can actually lose their life from taking Ibogaine and Iboga. And you know what? It actually happens quite often, very often. So we're bringing some light into that conversation. And if you've ever wondered about the complexities of Iboga and Ibogaine treatment, this episode is a must listen. And I don't think it could be more timely just based on everything that's going on in the space right now. So, Juliana, thank you so much for coming on. We're so excited to share you with the Modern Psychedelics fam, and so grateful that you are the first person on the show to be really diving into Ibogaine with us today. And if you are a paid subscriber to the show, you will be hearing this episode a week early before the general public, as well as get an ad-free listening experience. In addition, you will have access to a bonus subscribers-only podcast where you can ask me anything at all. So if you're not a subscriber, it would mean so much to me and really help the show to sustain itself. If you become a subscriber for only $4.99 a month, you can find a link for that in the show notes below. And with that, let's get into this fantastic episode with Juliana. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to have this conversation today.
Yeah, we've been planning this for months and months and
Yeah.
months. So it's so good to finally be sitting down with you. People listening might be like, Juliana Mulligan, that name sounds familiar. Your name was just dropped on the most listened to podcast in the world, Joe Rogan's episode with Rick Perry and Brian Hubbard. What was that like for you to
Yeah.
hear you mention like that in front of like millions and millions of people?
Yeah. It was funny because he gave me a heads up. He was going to mention me a few days in advance, but it was over the holidays and I didn't think about it. And then the day before I realized, oh my God, I'm about to get hundreds of emails. I need to get my Calendly link working and all, other details like that. So it was, I didn't really process it till it happened. And it was also, honestly, I want to acknowledge that it's weird because there's also a lot of things that Joe Rogan pushes that I don't agree with that I think have been harmful to the psychedelic world and just humanity in general. Like I'm not really that aligned with Joe Rogan. And so it was bittersweet. Like I'm happy to have my name out there and most importantly, good info about Ibogaine treatment out there because Brian Hubbard kills it whenever he talks. And also I don't want to be like celebrating somebody with harmful views too much.
I totally
Yeah.
understand what you mean. Yeah, I only really tune into his episodes about psychedelics. What did you think of that interview and how Ibogaine was portrayed to millions of people?
I thought that it was done mostly well. Like I said, Brian always does an excellent job portraying the important things. I'm of course glad that he talked about the safety issues, which are of massive importance with Iboga and Ibogaine. The one thing that was missing was talk about Bwisi and about the sustainability and reciprocity work that's needed in Gabon. That was a big missing chunk, but I also imagine that it's super hard to remember to get everything into a podcast on such a big platform. It was probably pretty overwhelming, so I don't think he did that intentionally. But yeah, that was a missing piece that I think is important. But overall, he hit a lot of important pieces, and the people who have been contacting me really understood that safety is a major factor, which was the most important thing to me.
I couldn't agree with you more about the lack of acknowledgement for Bwiti and
Yeah.
the Indigenous roots, and even Iboga, I think, was barely mentioned, if at all. And for me, the conversation lacked in highlighting the process of integration, especially for
Yeah.
the community that they were speaking to. Integration is so important. So, yeah, but amazing to get the information out there to so many people.
Yeah.
Your story is really incredible. Do you want to share it a little bit with people
Sure.
so that we
Yeah.
understand where you're coming from?
Yeah, I'm happy to. The way that I came to work in the Ibogaine field was through my own process with struggling with the opioid dependence. I spent the majority of my 20s dealing with the dependence to multiple opioids and subsequently going through rehabs and medication assisted treatment, 12-step programs, served time in county jail, all of the typical things that happens to drug users in this country. And I did not find any of the treatment that was available helpful in any way. And so it didn't work. And I would sometimes make it to a few months without opioids and I'd always go back, which is not surprising because you feel awful getting off opioids for months, sometimes up to a year. It takes a long time for your brain chemistry to snap back out of that, if it does at all. And so I had heard about Ibogaine a few years before I did it. And I knew that eventually I was going to need to do it. Something in me just knew, but I didn't have the funds at the time when I first heard about it to go and use it. So when I was 27, I was living in Bogota, Colombia, and I was teaching English and had recently gone back to using opioids as I figured out how to get them from the pharmacies there with no prescription, which I don't think is possible anymore. Side note, because I did it so much and blew it out as a possibility for everybody. But it was through that process of having unlimited opioids, as many as I wanted, that I realized, okay, I'm really over this. This is not fun. It's miserable. I feel very alone and very sad all of the time. I need to move on from this. I'm over it. But because I had essentially unlimited access, I had developed a super high tolerance. And so I thought, okay, I think the only option for me is going to do this Ibogaine that I heard about. And I found a clinic in Guatemala. And I left Bogota and never really went back except for years later for a visit. I just picked up and left my whole life there. And I want to emphasize that it was really having unlimited access to opioids that helped me to get over it. That's why I'm a big proponent of let people do the drugs they want until they're ready to move on, rather than pushing people before they're ready, because that was an essential part of my process, which is also why I'm a big harm reduction proponent in all of my work. But so I ended up going to Guatemala and doing Ibogaine. The place I selected was not safe. I didn't understand what to look for, especially back then. There was far less options than there are now for treatment. So I just went with the place that had the person I connected with the most on the phone, which was this very charismatic, very heartfelt, but very unstable person running a clinic in Guatemala City. And long story short, they didn't follow a lot of the basic safety protocols that you should with a treatment. And they ended up giving me double the maximum amount that's safe to give any human being, which if anyone took the amount that I did, they would die or end up in the hospital. That's just how it goes with Ibogaine. You can't play around with the doses. Just like any medicine in a hospital, you don't give double the safe dose. What happened is I had the cardiotoxic side effect from Ibogaine, which I'm not going to get really technical, but it's basically a rhythm that your heart goes into that will end in cardiac arrest. Ended up having 6 cardiac arrests. Fortunately, after I was at a hospital, they put me on an external pacemaker, which is temporary, for about 2 weeks. And then my heart went back to normal completely. It was just that I had too much Ibogaine in my system. And in that process, people think, oh my God, this is so awful. How did you still want to advocate for Ibogaine? Because my first memory of coming to in the hospital after having 6 cardiac arrests, I didn't remember any of that at all. I remember thinking, oh my God, this is the future of opioid use disorder treatment. This is it. And I need to do everything I can to advance this treatment and make it safer, and to change the way that our society in the US understands substance use and treats it, because what we have offered in this country and the way we understand so-called addiction is completely wrong, and it needs a complete overhaul. So I just saw this all at once. I saw that I was meant to do this, that everything I had been through that I had previously been made to feel guilty and ashamed of, thanks to society's view on what we call addiction, all of that had felt so heavy to me about my past, suddenly I saw that it had value in meeting, that it was my training to do the work I was meant to do going forward. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I had found my purpose, and I felt like I understood why I was here. It all made sense all at one time. And the thought of wanting to opioid again, it was just off the table. There was never any what traditional treatment would call like a relapse risk. That was not even on the table for me, because I was so happy to feel connected in this world and understanding why I'm here, that dissociating myself from reality didn't even make sense anymore. I would say about half the people I work with do have some cravings afterwards. So that is normal too for some people. It's not always this like dramatic, I stepped into a new brain and body experience that I had. But for some people, it is. And for some people, they might still have some cravings and there's some more work to do. That doesn't mean that Ibogaine didn't work. I just want to set that up there. It's not always a giant miracle like this. But for me, it really was. It was a massive shift. And I really felt like I'd been given a new brain. And I skipped about, I don't know, 3/4 of the withdrawal I had coming to me. I was doing a very high dose of pharmaceutical fentanyl before going down there. They said I had the highest tolerance they'd ever treated. So to not have withdrawal for the most part, except for some residual discomfort, I was in disbelief. My mom said I kept telling her over the phone, I'm not in withdrawal. And she would say, I know, you told me already. I just couldn't believe it. As after being an opioid user and going through so many cold turkey withdrawals, it's surreal to get off opioids and not have that. And so that was the other major component of this. So I was off on my path and running from there. I ended up moving back to the US and I got a EMT certification. I went to my first Ibogaine conference in 2012, where I met Dr. Ken Alper, the most famous Ibogaine researcher, where he really broke down for me what happened to my treatment, because I didn't fully understand what had gone wrong until that point. He gave a presentation about almost an identical case to mine, where I got, oh, okay, so the guys who treated me, despite them being very heartfelt guys, they just don't know what they're doing, and they're not being careful. And that's why with Ibogaine, you can't play around when it comes to safety. You can't shortcut it. I started really getting integrated into the community and understanding the safety and ethics of how this treatment works. I did the EMT certification because I wanted to approach working in a clinic with somewhat of a medical knowledge and base. And when I went to work in my first clinic, I was on the medical team. And I ended up working in 3 clinics after that, learning the treatment from different styles and different protocols. At the end of which I realized that the medical aspect was not really my calling, nor was just running a clinic. And I wasn't sure what my role was to be in the community yet. And so I went back to school to become a psychotherapist. And since then, what I do has evolved a lot to be a therapist working with people before and afterward, but also a consultant for new clinics, for research projects. That's how I know Brian Hubbard. I was apparently the second person he ever talked to about Ibogaine in the world. Randomly. And so I end up advising people on all things Iboga and Ibogaine related now. And yeah, I guess that was the longer-winded version I wanted to tell the story, but I hope that's okay.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. Thank you so much for sharing. And
Yeah.
wow, 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 wow. I don't even know where to begin with that story. You mentioned that after you came out of the treatment and after your near-death experience, after treatment, the thing that stood out to you the most was that you were not in withdrawal, and also that your entire paradigm of what addiction means, what it means to be an addict, shifted. Can you tell us a
Yes.
little bit about that shift for you? Like, how
Yeah.
did you view addiction before, and what changed for you in that moment? How do you view addiction now?
Yeah. So this is an important part I didn't just mention in that part of my story, is that over the last 10 years, I've been lucky enough to be connected with the world of harm reduction and harm reduction psychotherapy. I did my clinical training at this place called the Center for Optimal Living with Dr. Andrew Tatarski that does something called integrative harm reduction psychotherapy. And this is an understanding of, we don't even use the word addiction, it's an understanding of substance use as not a disease that you're stuck with forever, but just as a symptom of underlying issues. When I first got out of my Ibogaine treatment, I hadn't developed my whole concept of where I'm at now with understanding addiction. It was more in that moment, I just saw that this way that people who use drugs are treated, where you go to treatment and they tell you, you don't know any better, you have a brain disease, you have to listen to us, you have to surrender to what we're saying, you're powerless, you're going to have this rest of your life. That didn't make any sense to me. It's like everybody on this planet has the capability to evolve and change. And addiction is not a brain disease. There's no scientific backing to that. That was invented by a charlatan named Dr. Jelinek in, I think it was the 50s, who wasn't even a doctor. And the reason his concept of addiction as a disease caught on is because we didn't have another better explanation for it. And of course, understanding addiction as a medical issue and not a moral issue was an important development in the history of how we understand this. But it's not the end-all be-all, and it's time to move on from that, because telling people that they're sick and there's nothing they can do about it and they could relapse at any time for the rest of their life is an awful thing to tell someone that has already been feeling disempowered and beaten down since childhood. I think the original trauma for many of us, including people who use drugs, is being told that what we think and feel is wrong, either by our families or by society, by our teachers. And so the last thing that we need to do when people come to treatment is to tell them what you think and feel is wrong. And also what you do when you label something as a brain disease, you're closing the door and on exploring the many unique and significant factors of why people use the substance. It's not just because they have a disease. There's meaning in that. People use substances to access parts of themselves that otherwise they're unable to access because they're cut off for whatever reason, because of trauma, because of their depression, because of anxiety. And so when I started doing my training at the Center for Optimal Living, the way we would work is we were curious about everything. It was like, oh, well, what do substances help you with? That's really important. We want to understand what that is, and so that we can see how else that might be able to be addressed. We weren't coming at people saying, you have to stop using drugs, because that also doesn't work. It has to be up to the person themselves. And there are people who successfully moderate. I just met with my client today who had a big issue with drinking and now is able to moderate and drink in a healthy way. So this one-size-fits-all notion is that if you have a problem, you have to go to AA and stop completely or you're going to die or end up in jail. It's simply not true. Nothing like that is black and white in mental health. And this term addict is really problematic, because what you're saying is that the only thing that's important about that person is that they struggle with a drug issue. And so that's why we're using this term people who use drugs, or a person struggling with substance use disorder. And this concept that people who struggle with substance use are especially sick and different from everybody else in the world is simply not true. Everybody on this planet has a time in their life where they lean on a destructive coping mechanism, whether that be a substance or whether it be shopping, relationships. Workaholism is a big one. The difference between people who use drugs and somebody who is a workaholic is that workaholism is glorified in this society. Drug use is unsafe because it's illegal. The only difference between people who use drugs and everyone else is that they're doing something that society has made unsafe by making it illegal. They don't have a special, unique disease. And that's also why I don't personally use the word recovery, because that language to me is saying that I'm an especially sick person and other people aren't. And I don't agree with that. I think all of us are recovering from something. So I don't like to participate in language that separates me from everybody else. I think it contributes to the stigma around struggling with substance use.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, really good distinction there between what that old model of addiction was and how harmful it has been to the recovery community. Because you work with clients under this new understanding of substance dependency, that it's a symptom of underlying issues, right? You were kind of in both worlds for a little bit. You were trying to get help for yourself under that old model, and now you're working with people under this new understanding of it. I want to ask, what is the success rate? I don't even know if we can use success rate, but like how many people are undergoing treatment with Ibogaine, or maybe not even Ibogaine, just under this new understanding of substance dependency versus before? And what is it like to take people through that process under this new model versus the old? Did you know that your problems don't come from the situations or circumstances themselves? Your problems come from how you approach them. More specifically, your problems come from the level of consciousness that you approach them with. It's pretty simple. Here's how it works. Anytime something happens to us, we can approach the situation from various levels of consciousness. You can come from a low level of consciousness that perpetuates the problem and keeps you stuck, drained, hopeless, and under stress. Or you can come from a high level of consciousness that allows you to move forward because you can more easily tap into creative solutions and access your intuition. The good news is that at any given time, you can choose how you show up and therefore have a massive impact on how your life unfolds. The trick is to be aware of all of the options available to you, which most of us aren't, which is why most people feel stuck and unable to move forward. But that job you hate, your codependent relationship, or the numbing anxiety of not knowing your purpose in life can be the exact thing that moves you forward and gives you clarity, as long as you're approaching it from a high level of consciousness. In my coaching program, I will help you become hyper aware of your current approach and help you shift to higher levels of consciousness. By addressing blockages keeping you stuck, which are often subconscious, we unlock flow, acceptance, peace, joy, all of those things we want more of in life. And this is not woo-woo. I am using a research-validated coaching method that's benefited thousands and has been studied and developed over 25 years plus. Whether you're corporate or spiritual or both, this is an approach that offers practical integration into everyday life, and it happens to pair just brilliantly with psychedelic work. High consciousness living is achievable daily, not just during psychedelic experiences. Psychedelics illuminate the path, but it's our job to walk it every day. My coaching program will provide you with a grounded and operational way to integrate high consciousness into your daily life. I am currently onboarding new souls into my practice. So if you would like to learn more about the program, just visit modernpsychedelics.net/coaching. I've linked that for you in the show notes. Or if you are ready to apply and get on a call with me to see if this program is right for you, just go to modernpsychedelics.net/apply. That's modernpsychedelics.net/apply. All right, I can't wait to hear from you. Let's get back to the episode.
Well, I just want to say first that unfortunately, not all Ibogaine clinics are up to date in their understanding of substance use disorder and how to work with it. Unfortunately, there's still places that are pushing the old antiquated disease model of addiction. Most of the mental health world in this country still functions on the disease model of addiction concept and 12-step concept, which is not scientifically based at all. I mean, you can get court-ordered to 12-step programs in the US. It's absolutely bonkers. It's supposed to be a voluntary program. It's also a very Christian-centric religious program, so that doesn't make sense either. Anyway, I wanted to say that to say not all Ibogaine clinics are as progressive as I would like them to be. Some are, yes, but there's others that have a long way to go. So even in the US, even like this harm reduction therapy model, this is New York City. We supposedly have the most up-to-date everything in many ways. And the center was the only therapy center exclusively focused on harm reduction therapy. There are harm reduction therapists on their own, but it's not like it's really a mainstream thing. It has been growing in the last few years. People are starting to understand there's a lot more beyond 12 steps, but it's still in the pioneering phase, I would say. And I want to mention that it is Black and brown people and sex workers who pioneered harm reduction in the 80s with the HIV epidemic, and people figured out how to protect their communities on their own because our government wasn't doing it. So this is a movement that really started long before it became integrated into therapy practice. So anyway, all of that to say, what is it like working with somebody with this modality? The mainstream way to work with people is you tell them, as a therapist, I can't work with you if you're still using substances, which is awful. If someone's coming to you for help and you say, no, you have to do the one thing that's helping, you can't do the one thing that's helping you to survive every day in order to work with me. This obviously doesn't make sense and goes against the basic principles of psychotherapy, which is you meet people where they're at, you support people where they're at. So when you're working from the harm reduction perspective, you welcome wherever people are at, and you start with checking in with them with what are your particular goals? Is it moderation? Is it abstinence? Do you want medication assisted treatment? And whatever it is that they want to do, you help them get there. Even if you think your plan isn't as safe as I would like, you still start with them where they're there because they're not ready to make a bigger jump. Like I was mentioning my client who had a big issue with drinking, and he successfully moved to moderation. This is somebody who was really diligent in planning and getting a lot of support to be able to be in therapy and go to outpatient to be able to do that. For other people, it might just be, I've been using cocaine every day, I want to only use it on the weekends, and I help them get there. And often when they get to that place, they decide, you know what, I actually want to cut it down a little bit more. And this happens over a years-long period. And in that time, regardless of their substance use, because that's not the main issue, we're able to get in and dive into deeper things that they've been through in their life, to different experiences and traumas and their anxiety. And you can still make progress psychologically, spiritually, even if you're using substances. This notion that if you're using drugs, you can't make progress is not true. When you're working with clients, it's about helping them to feel safe to dive in no matter what's going on with their behaviors.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it sounds like there's a lot more agency and empowerment.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's the thing is, like I was saying, so many people feel extremely disempowered by the circumstances in their lives. And then they go to drug treatment and they're re-traumatized, being told that they have a disease for life and there's nothing they can do. And a lot of what I do in the beginning is just help people recover from treatment trauma, from the mainstream drug treatment system, from mainstream mental health. And when they finally realize and are able to accept, oh, I'm not screwed for life, I don't have something wrong with my brain, that's when we can really start doing some work because they feel strong and empowered for the first time. It's really an amazing and rewarding thing to witness. I remember I had my realization after Ibogaine that something about the way we understand addiction wasn't right. But it was really a few years later when I was taking a sociology course where I realized, oh my God, it's not the individual that's the problem, it's society. Addiction is a social construct. People use substances and do other destructive behaviors to survive the circumstances of capitalism because of how much we have to work and grind and all the different responsibilities we have. If we had a more humane and gentle society, people would not need to use substances to survive it, for the most part. And so I really got to understand the sickness of society as opposed to an individual being sick, that we are all just responding to the circumstances around us. And even what I'm doing with clients, even though I love doing it and I think it's important, it has a limit. The society that we live in has to change. Capitalism is an exploitative and violent system. And even Ibogaine has its limits for how much we can do if people are being set back to survive in inhumane conditions. And honestly, the people I see most successful after Ibogaine are people that have money. And I hate to say that, but it's because they have the means to take time off, to do things for themselves that's nurturing. A lot of people don't have that privilege. And people that don't have that privilege don't even end up at Ibogaine. And so this is also something I like to bring up as important when we're talking about psychedelic therapies. Many people can't access it. And many people don't have the means to live healthier lives afterwards, like we're telling them to, because they can't afford to. I just want to bring that up because I think it's key.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. What is your thought around so the society needs to change in order for the individual to change on some level? What are your thoughts around, like, how much is that social change going to be driven by individual transformation and individual growth? It's something that I think about all the time. So I'm curious about your thoughts here.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think that's definitely really important. I think The more a lot of us can be self-aware and working on ourselves and aware of the circumstances in society, the more we're going to be able to speak up and take action to do something to change things. I've got a client who is high up at a really globally known major bank, is an executive, and through their work with psychedelics has realized that this is a horrible industry and they want out of it. This is somebody whose whole life has been like a high up financial executive. And so it is, I don't want to say, damn these rich people being able to do everything that everyone else can't, because they're also really important. They have power and platform to be able to make change and do things differently. So I do think that individual transformation is important, but we really need to get people in power on board as well.
It's very much, yeah, one affects the other. They're very related. I want to ask you, I want to go back to your Ibogaine journey, your first one. Did you have, what was happening for you during that treatment? Did you have a process of, like a visionary process that was taking place? Did you have trauma that you were processing? Were you processing content, or did you go straight into the heart problems and into the stress response?
So actually, the heart stuff didn't happen until I think it was like 24 hours later.
Wow.
Because, and that can happen, you're actually in a risk zone for 36 hours afterwards. So there was a whole period I was on a ton of Ibogaine, and they had also given me a lot of Valium, which is safe to do with Ibogaine. Not a lot. There's a dose that's safe to give with Ibogaine because my withdrawal symptoms were so bad, and normally Ibogaine starts to attenuate withdrawal symptoms, and it wasn't for me, so they gave me this extra medication. So I actually didn't remember anything, which is, I'm not the only one that's happened to, but it was I didn't remember anything at all until about 3 months later, where I got a snippet of visions. I kind of like that I had this experience because people get so focused on the visionary process of psychedelics. And really, the important thing for me is that I came out of it with these massive realizations and insights. So it's still there. And it showed me that it's okay. You don't have to be so attached to the visions and what you get and what you see, because Ibogaine is still going to do its work regardless. And so I kind of didn't worry about it. And then I got a little snippet 3 months later. It wasn't anything about trauma. It was like some imagery around, I can tell you the whole thing if you want, but it was really just some symbolic imagery of me like climbing out of my old life and into my new one. But it was a brief snippet. So I don't know what else happened. I don't remember. And when I did Ibogaine the second time when I was working in a clinic, it was just a lot of random images that didn't seem to make sense. And I've noticed that this happens for some people. Either they don't remember or they get random images. And then other people will get very detailed, clear storylines where they can tell you this whole magical journey they went on. They talked to their dead grandmother. They went to Africa and they saw this childhood memory. And some people get that, but not everyone gets that. And so I want to say that it's normal to not get that so that people's expectations aren't, or they don't think they did something wrong when they didn't get the visions, because it's really different for everyone. Yeah.
Yeah. No, thank you for bringing that in. I've seen that myself. I sometimes go to support Iboga retreats, and there's definitely a disappointment that is common when people don't have the whole visionary journey. And then they almost trick themselves into thinking that it didn't work because they didn't get what they expected. But on the other side, you can so clearly see that the gifts of the medicine are very much with them. And so thank you
Yeah.
for bringing that in. And there needs to be more awareness around the idea that like everyone's journey is different, and the medicine's going to do what it needs to do on you the way that it does. Yeah. Looking back on it, how do you feel about the way your journey happened and the fact that you almost lost your life?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I literally, the nickname they gave me at the clinic is Seis Milagros, which means 6 miracles, because they literally saw me dead and revived 6 times with a defibrillator. It was pretty dramatic, but it makes sense for the way my life's gone. I've got a lot of really intense stories, and I don't know, I'm glad that it was this way because it geared my work to being focused on safety and ethics right off the bat. And when I talk about safety and ethics, people listen up because of my story. So it's actually been a really important career move for that to have happened to me. On Double Aries Moon in Scorpio, I make a big dramatic entrance. It's not surprising to me. I think that it's actually helpful to the Ibogaine world overall to have this story so prominent so that people understand that this is nothing to play with and you can't cut corners. And these people that say, oh, well, I understand the spirit of Iboga, so I don't need EKGs. That is bullshit. People can end up in the hospital even on small doses if they've got a chronic heart issue and some people have arrhythmias that aren't a problem in normal life that will become a problem when you give them even a small amount of Ibogaine. Yeah, there's no cutting corners. You have to do the cardiac screening and monitoring. And my story really emphasizes that.
Yeah, that's wonderful for the world that you were able to reframe such a crazy and unfortunate and tragic experience into serving humanity, into serving the medicine.
Yeah, and when I came to in the hospital, I didn't care that it happened because I felt so amazing. Like I felt like I literally stepped into a new body with a new brain. So
Wow.
I was like, great. I guess this it worked how it was supposed to.
Yeah. Amazing. Yeah, and you saying that there are Iboga or Ibogaine providers out there who rely on intuition or a connection with the medicine in order to dose or in order to screen. That might work in Africa where they don't have the pharmaceuticals and the
And they've
lifestyle.
grown up with the Iboga. They've eaten it
Right.
since they were in the womb. The Nganga of each village knows each person in the village from
Yeah.
birth. It's very different health circumstances over there. They all have the same food. They're not on medications. They're not using the substances we have. You can't compare how the safety works over there compared to here because we're
Yeah.
coming from very complicated health circumstances in the West.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, well said. And you consult and work with Ibogaine clinics right now. I'm assuming you have a pretty good understanding of the lay of the land, of the players, of who's out there, of the
Hmm.
providers. Ibogaine
Yeah.
and yoga community is pretty tight knit. Out of everyone out there who is a provider, what percentage would you say are providing Ibogaine and Iboga in a way that is safe?
It's a very small percentage, unfortunately. I have done volunteer work for years handling complaints about clinics and providers. So I know what's going on pretty well. Right now in Mexico, there are 4 clinics offering detox that I feel safe about, and there's many more than that
Mhm.
open in Mexico. There's
Yeah.
some not just unsafe places, there's some places that are just downright dangerous where they've harmed hundreds of people and are still in operation because there's no repercussions for them there. It's a big problem.
Yeah.
There's also, Iboga retreats that are offering Bwiti. There's a couple of those that I feel good about, and there's more that I feel bad about than there are safe
Mhm.
ones. So I don't know what the percentage is, but it is small compared to the amount of facilities that are open worldwide, unfortunately, which
Yeah.
is why I'm working on this new project, my training and certification project, because it's been my big dream for a long time that we have a centralized training process, which it's unreal that we've never had that. Centralized training process that has accompanying supervision and standards that you have to adhere to maintain certification. So this is something I've been thinking about for years and something we really need. And I hope that this can up the standard of safety in the field.
Wow, that's amazing. I definitely want to talk to you about that a little bit later. But
Sure.
first, I do want to get into some of your wisdom and insight around harm reduction, around selecting a provider when there are so many out there who are not doing so safely. And in fact, the reason that I originally reached out to you to come on the podcast was following a tragic death during an Iboga retreat in Costa Rica. And that was, as someone who is in the Iboga community, as someone who loves the medicine dearly, that was really hard for me to process. And it was hard for me to process because it just felt like a hammer was being thrown in the whole thing. Usually when these things happen, they are avoidable.
Mm.
And so it's tragic to lose a human life due to not being careful when you could have been more careful. So, can you start telling us a little bit about what it looks like to receive treatment in a safe way
Mhm.
and how to know if a provider is operating with the highest of safety standards?
Yes. So I have this guide with a list of questions on my website to ask providers to evaluate them for their safety. And there's a lot of really detailed questions in there about protocols, but big thing is, are they doing a full medical history with you? Are they asking you for an EKG? That's the basic. The other important one is, do they have cardiac monitoring? And if they are, the Iboga retreats generally don't have cardiac monitoring, but they are checking pulse and blood pressure every 20 to 30 minutes. And generally, Iboga retreats should be taking lower risk clients and not doing detox, because
Yeah.
it's not detox, you absolutely need cardiac monitoring. So for those places that are lower risk and doing small Iboga doses, they can get away with the pulse and blood pressure check. Although, I don't know, I wish there was some cardiac monitoring they could do that would be less invasive for them too, because again, anything can happen. But for clinics, most people are contacting me looking for detox in a clinic, or they have a neurological condition and they want a clinical setting. So for those, cardiac monitoring, are they asking for an EKG? The other one is, what's their mental health staff like? How are these people trained? Is there going to be somebody present at all times for the clients to talk to? I think this is an important component. There's a lot I can say to weed out unsafe people about opioid detox. There's a lot of nuance to how those protocols work. One of the big things is Suboxone and methadone. Ibogaine does not work within 4 weeks of use of those substances. You need to be off those for 4 weeks. And any clinic telling you that they can do it earlier than that is, they don't know what they're doing. Some clinics will offer to have you for a longer period of a treatment because they're going to give you morphine for a few weeks first. That's acceptable. But if a clinic says that you can take Ibogaine like days after taking Suboxone, that's a red flag. Don't go there. It's not going to work because of the way long-acting opioids work.
And is that just it's not going to work, or is that actually also dangerous and fatal?
It's it's both. It is not safe. You're probably not going to die 1 week after Suboxone taking Ibogaine, but you are going to go through withdrawal right afterwards,
Yeah.
and that negates the whole point of the Ibogaine
That's
treatment.
probably what happened in that documentary, Dosed.
Oh
Did you?
yeah,
Is
I
that what
I
happened from
forget.
there?
I get the
Yeah.
documentaries confused, but yeah, that could be.
Yeah.
Um, and there are some people who say that they've done it, and I it's just the Ibogaine is not going to work well. You're going to send people home in withdrawal if you do it sooner than 4 weeks. So that's a big one.
Yeah.
What else? I have like 30 questions on my website, and for some reason right now, I'm like not thinking of any of them. But let me see. Yeah, the EKG is like the most important part. And the other red flag is, are they pressuring you to come down soon? That I think is a big red flag, because Ibogaine doesn't work unless a person is ready and committed. And if you're putting pressure on someone, it's because you're trying to make money. And to me, that is not centering safety in the process. I've always thought that Ibogaine clinics should ultimately be not for profit, because when safety issues happen, when clinics cut corners because they're trying to make their profit margin. I hope someday somebody opens a not-profit clinic so we can not have this factor in play.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
To summarize these safety and ethical issues, what do you see as the biggest gaps right now in the Ibogaine treatment world that we need to fill?
The biggest gaps, I think, definitely just people understanding what the basic protocols are. Oh, something else that I wanted to mention that I think is important is clinics that have people working who have just done Ibogaine to get out of their own patterns. A lot of us that work in the industry have a substance disorder past. And yes, we're equipped to do really good work, but you need time to work on yourself first. One of the questions on my website is about like how long has the main provider and the other people working there, how long have they been away from their own treatment? How long has it been? I really don't think it should be less than a year. We've had a big problem with people opening clinics like a month or two after their own treatments, and it's mostly a disaster. Or what happens is the provider themselves is not healthy because they don't know how to take care of themselves and they work themselves too hard. We have a very high rate of provider burnout. On average, one Ibogaine provider in the world dies or ends up homeless on the street per year. No exaggeration. There's actually 3 former Ibogaine providers that I personally know and had friendships with on the street right now in Southern California. It's devastating. And this might be surprising to people. It's not to me. It's because we are all coming from really unhealthy patterns. And when you go directly into providing Ibogaine without doing your own work on yourself and getting therapeutic support, it's not going to go well. You're going to burn yourself out. You're not going to be safe for the clients as well. So this segues back to your question is we need more support for the people working in the industry. We need supervision, like actual professional supervision, so people can be checking in about their cases, because giving Ibogaine treatment is the most stressful job I've ever done. You're on duty essentially 24 hours a day when you have a client. They're going to possibly project all their deepest, darkest, hardest material at you and blame you for it at any time. It's really hard to manage countertransference in that situation. So professional supervision and individual therapy for everybody working in a clinic. I think clinics should be paying for everybody's therapy who works at the clinic. So supervision, therapy are big ones that we're missing, which is also why I'm trying to start this project that has supervision, ongoing supervision included in it. Another big gap. Yeah, just basic training for the protocols. Like clinics seem to be doing whatever they want in different corners of the world. You know, we have the clinical guidelines that came out in 2016, which was a huge deal that those came out. They're printed, they're on the internet, they're available, and still there's people not using them. So that's a big issue.
Yeah, it's the whole Iboga provider issue is very real in terms of people going through treatment, opening up clinics, wanting to help right away. And that happens with all medicines. People take medicine and psychedelics, and then
Yeah, I'm meant to do this work. God gave me this path, and it's like
Yeah.
this evangelism that happens right afterwards.
But with Ibogaine, it is
It's more
much
dangerous.
more dangerous than with mushrooms or MDMA. And I want to share a little story with you too, because within a month of that death in Costa Rica, I actually learned of another death, and it was a man that was in my first Iboga retreat. He was recovering from substance abuse and I think kind of had a hard journey, lots of relapses, but he also decided to open up an Ibogaine clinic in Costa Rica. It was short-lived. It didn't last very long because exactly what you said could happen. His own personal way of being was not able to support that work. And unfortunately, he had a relapse again and did an Iboga ceremony to detox, and
Oh, I heard about this. Yeah. Oh,
he died.
yeah.
Yeah, this
Yeah.
was a couple of months ago. And between those two deaths, it was just it's been a lot to process for the Iboga space.
Yeah. And this has been happening for years. I've got a whole list of passed on providers that I could talk about. It's really devastating. And
Yeah.
clients. And this actually just reminded me of something in terms of red flags to look for and why a lot of accidents have happened is you cannot get off benzodiazepines with Ibogaine. Xanax,
I've heard that.
Valium, Klonopin, you cannot do that. Do not reduce your dose before Ibogaine because Ibogaine lowers the seizure threshold and you can have a seizure when you're going through benzo withdrawal. So it's like a guaranteed seizure cardiac arrest during the Ibogaine. I've actually seen it happen at a clinic I worked at that wasn't screening people or drug testing people properly. And the client had been on benzos and not told us about it. And the drug tests we had didn't test for it. She survived, but it was a narrow survivor. So any clinic that tells you you can get off benzos or to reduce your benzo before treatment, that is a red flag. The only way to get off benzos is a long, slow taper, unfortunately. It's one of the worst, most dangerous withdrawals in the world. There's something called the Ashton Manual that you can find online that details how to do the long, slow taper. But either you have to continue your benzo through the Ibogaine, which is safe to do at a safe clinic. They know how to do the right dosage to keep you stable on Ibogaine. Or you do a long, slow taper for a year and then do Ibogaine once you're completely off. That's the only way. So that's a huge red flag. The other thing I just remembered too is one size fits all dosing does not work with Ibogaine. Everybody reacts very differently to this medicine. And the only way to understand how to dose people is once you're on a cardiac monitor, you're given a test dose. And based on how your heart responds to the test dose, it's how you decide to continue dosing. You can't just say, everyone get, this many milligrams per kilo. It's not, Ibogaine doesn't work like that. You have to be adaptable. I think when you call a clinic, you ask them about how do you do your dosing? How is that? How do you gauge how much that I get? I think I do have that as a question on my website, another important one.
Mm-hmm. Obviously, we need more Ibogaine providers as this medicine is emerging. And as hopefully we have more research and as people like yourself are developing training programs, the demand for Iboga and Ibogaine providers is going to be increasing in the coming years. It already is. What's your vision for ushering people into that role in a way that is safe and, not unhinged, I want to say?
That's the baseline for Ibogaine, not unhinged. The bar is low. Yeah, and there are wonderful, stable, brilliant people working, but it's not the majority. So I'll talk about this program that I'm working on developing now. It's called Udrima, which means training or educational institute in Greek. I recently found out that I have a little Greek side note. It's called Udrima. It's going to be the first training and certification program for Ibogaine providers. It's something I've been wanting to exist for many years. And the reason that no one ever tried to attempt this is because how do you incentivize clinics that are operating all over the world outside of many different borders to do a program when they're already making money giving treatments? And so there's always been that kind of logistical issue is how do we get people to do this? How do we make it so it's respected? And so that, because it's not like we can be the police and enforce protocols, but what we can do is have certain standards people need to adhere to maintain certification. And so that's my plan. What I'm envisioning is having a program that has in-person and virtual classes and also accompanying internships if people aren't already at a clinic. And in this program, we're going to, of course, teach medical protocols, all the safety protocols I've been talking about, and we're going to teach the harm reduction psychotherapy approach to working with people who struggle with substance issues and other behaviors. When you get the certification for this program, and one of the requirements to maintain will be to be in our ongoing twice-a-month supervision. And there will also be peer supervision groups as well. All the clients of certified clinics also will need to submit anonymous feedback to us so that we can watch what's going on at the clinic. And so this body acts as not just a training program, but also as a standard clients will look for when they're selecting clinics so that they know there's a body who's keeping eyes on this clinic and who they can contact if something happens. And so it's both training and kind of a regulating, certifying body. It's crossing into a lot of areas, which some people I'm talking to are advising me against, but I don't care. I'm going to try to do it. I think that it's important that we have all these functions so that we can not just have a comprehensive training, but have support for people as they're working so that they can be checking in with somebody about their cases, so that they can check in with each other about their cases. And the way, when I'm designing the curriculum, I've got a lot of ideas of there's a lot to put into this curriculum, but I'm going to be doing an open call to the field for feedback on the curriculum because I want everybody's diverse knowledge and experience to be included. some of the most talented, brilliant Ibogaine providers who've been around for a decade or two they don't have professional licensure, and they operate very much under the radar. And I want to make sure that those people are acknowledged and included, because right now, a lot of people with PhDs and the ability to publish research who get recognition for Ibogaine, and those often aren't the people who are doing the actual work and have the actual wealth of experience. Yeah.
That's really interesting because at least with Iboga, there's a bit of a clear pathway to becoming an Iboga provider in terms of getting your initiation, studying with a teacher, and some people choose to follow that path that has been set out, and some do not. But with Ibogaine, there's nothing. Like, how does one
even with Iboga, I don't really think that's a clear pathway. In Bwiti, to really be deemed an Nganga, it takes years of work of living in Gabon full time. And right now, there's this guy who charges you, I think it's like $15,000 for 3 months in his village, and he knights you in Nganga. It's total bullshit. And so I actually don't think that it's that clear to become a provider of Iboga. And I question, can someone from the West really do Bwiti and be doing a ceremony properly? There's a lot of debate about this, and I don't know. I've got some concerns around how Bwiti is done in the West. And one of the problems, this reminded me of something that I think is important, is Bwiti. I just did my initiation in Gabon this last July. Bwiti is in many ways very patriarchal. Depending on the lineage and what village you're in, is often very patriarchal. It's very confrontational. We're going to tell you how to be. It's a very intense boot camp-like experience to do an initiation. And this works for them. This is their tradition that gives them meaning and makes sense to them. We are coming from the West with a lot of different mental health factors and different types of trauma. And I don't think that the Bwiti confrontational approach is always the best thing. In fact, I've seen people be re-traumatized by it. And some of the retreat I see not factoring in a Western approach as much as they need to when people are coming with severe PTSD. Like, I had a client who went to a place in Costa Rica, and she was being told, it's your fault that you didn't get what you wanted out of the medicine. You didn't surrender properly. You didn't listen to us. I hear this a lot. That is awful. That is exactly what I want us to move away from. That, like, you don't know any better. Listen to us. You did it wrong. That's the last thing that somebody with trauma needs to hear. And so the way, there's a few places that combine the Bwiti and a Western psychotherapy approach together well. There's a place in Baja called Aterio
that's where I'm going next.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Yes. I think that they're doing a great job. My friends at Root Healing, I think, do a nice job. But there's a lot of places that aren't, and there's a lot of Indigenous practices on a pedestal by people in the West, which, yes, we need to revere and respect and honor and elevate and protect them. And that doesn't mean it's the right thing for us all the time. The experience I had in the village in Gabon, I don't know if I have any of my clients that would send to do that ceremony. It was very intense and hard.
Not trauma-informed.
Oh my God. This is not trauma-informed at all. And so you can't just take Indigenous practices and bring them over to the West and then expect that they're going to be healing.
It seems like we're in a really interesting place right now, and I was talking with this about Paige at Aterio. The Iboga provider world is in a really interesting place right now, where it seems like for a long time Iboga providers were doing it one way, and there seems to be a bit of a shift happening right now, which is,
it's getting better. There have been improvements. Yes, it's true. Yeah, I think the conferences, we used to have regular international conferences, and I think that actually helped a lot to create more communication between the two styles of treatment. And the Iboga providers really got to understand, okay, we also deal with the cardiac risk. There's a misconception that when you do Iboga or TA, total alkaloid extract, that the cardiac risk is less, because there's a theory that the other alkaloids in Iboga counteract the cardiotoxicity of Ibogaine. That hasn't been proven. And I don't think that anyone should just count on that as a protective factor. to sidestep any of the cardiac safety protocols. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah, I love everything you just said so much. I can't wait to re-listen to what you just said, that little snippet there around, yeah, taking Bwiti into Western life and even Bwiti ceremony into Western life. And it's a tradition that has empowered my life so much, and I love it so much, but I also understand that there are aspects of it that don't necessarily makes sense for me as a Canadian white woman living in North America. Um, so yeah, it's, I don't know, right now in this moment, I just feel so grateful to be alive and involved in this work at this time where we're really trying to figure out how the heck do we make this work. Like, there are countries in Africa and South America and elsewhere in the world that have medicines and ways of living and wisdom to share with us, a culture that is deeply sick because of our capitalistic ways, which you talked about earlier, and we need their medicine. But how do we bring that medicine in, and how do we work with that in a way that, yes, honors and upholds them and maintains the integrity of the medicine and the ways without appropriating it, but also works for us? It's quite a challenge, isn't it?
It's complicated. It's really complicated.
It's
Yeah.
really complicated.
It's a lot of layers.
People like you on the case, though.
Yeah, I feel lucky to get to work on it. And even with my years being involved, I'm learning all of the time. And I think that an important thing is that there's a lot of people in the field who get to a place where they become receptive to feedback and unable to take responsibility for mistakes. And that is, I think, at the core of a lot of our issues in society in general, but definitely in the Ibogaine field, is that we have to be able to say, I fucked up, but I want to work on it. And a lot of the problems that we have come from people who double down and refuse to acknowledge that they've done something wrong. Like the retreat in Costa Rica that had the death. There has been, like, I'm not going to go into it in detail, but there is just a lot of effort being put out to not acknowledge any responsibility in the situation. And I've seen that happen over and over again. It's the root of many issues we have. We're all going to make mistakes. We all have things to learn. There's hard mistakes I've made that I had to learn from, and I probably will again. But the key thing is like, can we all be receptive to feedback and really take it in and not get defensive and say, okay, what I need help from the community to figure out how to repair this and what to learn.
I think a good example of that, I don't know, want your thoughts on this, but I think a good example of that, admitting that we did something wrong, was maybe the death that happened at Beyond. I heard an interview with them recently where they did take a lot of responsibility and shared with the public what happened. And yeah, and what do you think of that?
Yeah, I'm glad that they're doing that now. Yeah.
Because it really is unavoidable that there will be absolutely no deaths at any given Ibogaine and Iboga clinic. I think Jules Evans said it the best. Psychedelics are an extreme sport. They're never going to be 100% safe.
Yeah.
Right? And so there's going to be deaths sometimes, even at the places and with the providers that are really doing their very best to follow everything that we know about harm reduction and safety protocols. What do we do with that? What do we do with that, knowing that deaths are going to be inevitable?
I think, yes, it's like there's incidents with Ibogaine are inevitable, but I do think it's possible to not have a death. A lot of the deaths, when I look at it, it's when clinics accepted people for treatment that they knew were high risk, and they should have said no, and they knew that. And so this is where it comes in with a profit-driven model of a clinic ultimately not being safe. Because if profit is the focus, you're going to cut corners. And so I think that's really the ultimate safety mechanism, is changing how we're structuring the model of the organization that the clinic is.
Yeah, I completely see that. And there's so little that we know about Ibogaine that how possible is it that death might happen despite putting all of the protocols that we know in place? What do you think?
It's still a possibility, but if you're screening stringently and you've got cardiac monitoring, the chances are extremely low. If you are dosing sensitively and you're not pushing a one-size-fits-all protocol, if you have flexibility in your scheduling to say, for example, fentanyl has made Ibogaine treatment much more complicated in the last 5 years because you cannot do Ibogaine right after fentanyl. You need 7 to 14 days off of it. And if you have someone arriving, they're testing positive for fentanyl, you have to have flexibility in your scheduling to allow for their treatment night to be delayed. That has to be a possibility, because if you're trying to keep everything on schedule because the clinic needs to be on schedule for all the different reasons it does, and so you push someone to do Ibogaine too early when it's not the right time, that's when it gets dangerous. Mm-hmm. Flexibility is the key with Ibogaine, with dosing, with the schedule. I've seen clinics give someone the treatment when the person was exhibiting some concerning psychiatric warning signs, and they shouldn't have. Everybody at the clinic has to be sensitive and paying attention and understand that sometimes the plans have to be changed, even if it doesn't work for the clinic, even if it loses money for the clinic. The number one thing in Ibogaine is flexibility and room for flexibility and paying attention.
Amazing. Yeah, thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
I want to end on hearing a little bit about your initiation in Gabon, if you'd like to share, because was this your first time with Iboga?
Yeah, I had been to Gabon before in 2018, but I didn't have a chance to do a ceremony. We ate Iboga, but not in a big dose. So this was my first big dose of Iboga work, yes. It's tricky because we're not supposed to. It's confusing to me in some ways. We're not supposed to talk about everything, but it's been really hard for me not to, because some of the stuff is so wild that happens that I've probably blurted out more than I'm allowed to. But it's extremely intense. It's designed to push you to the limit of what you can stand. You lose a lot of autonomy over your physical self. You don't get to decide when you're sleeping, where you're sleeping, when you're bathing, how you bathe. It can be really upsetting, especially as someone who's formerly incarcerated. I don't like those types of hyper-controlling conditions. It was very hard for me. It absolutely pushed me to the limits of what I can stand. But at the end of that week, I saw how that was actually important for me in my process. And I'm not saying that's the right thing for everybody, but for me, it helped me to have an important realization of my process, which was mainly that I saw how I put Indigenous people and practices on a pedestal and devalued my own self and my own experience. And that also led me to see how I do that with many things in my life, with people and institutions, and putting them above myself and devaluing my own perspectives and experience. And I think that's a common, in a hierarchical capitalist society. I think we all have a little bit of that. So that experience really helped me to see the many times that I'm dehumanizing myself because I think there's something else that's better than me. And that was only possible because the people in that village I went to, although the initiation was extremely hard and intense and uncomfortable, were nothing but loving and sweet, even when I was upset and pissed off about what was going on. These women that were taking care of me were just unconditional love. And that, me getting upset and them not reacting to that and staying loving and supportive no matter what, was a big factor in getting me to a point of being able to have that realization. So it was a mix of extremes. It was incredibly uncomfortable and miserable, and also beautiful and magical because you're in the forest with these beautiful, sweet people who want to share their tradition with you. And at the end, I saw very clearly they love doing Bwiti. This is what gives them meaning. This is their party time. They really enjoy doing this. They were trying to give us a show. Like, they wanted us to see the best version of Bwiti they could. So they probably did things more extreme than they even do for themselves, which is a lot. But yeah, if it's something you're interested in, it's not for the faint of heart. It's very intense. And the people there are beautiful and sweet. And I want to recommend to people, if you're going to Gabon, if you're really feeling upset about something that's going on, speak up. If you have a guide or translator with you, tell them that you need to take a break or that you can't do something. They do want to know. At least the village I was at, they do want to know that. And I think that's important. One thing, I was going to say something else about it. Oh, the name I got was Mabundi Namudanga, which means the woman and the man, which I had been excited about finding out what's my name going to be for years. And it's like a silly thing that I think us in the West focus on because we've been stripped of our ancestral practices through colonization. And so we get excited about these Indigenous ceremonies and the names that we get and all of that. But it was really meaningful to me because I've often felt like I embody both genders. And so our Nganga was like spot on, and he saw a lot of things about myself and my initiation buddy. And the names we got were very profound and meaningful to us. And he also knew all kinds of psychic things about our lives, which is not surprising to me, but they're really onto something over there. It's really special in the forest. And also, I want to add that if you're going to Gabon to do an initiation, it's, the line of when you're like supporting their cultural practices and when you're harming them over there, it's really tricky and nuanced. And I suggest everybody to get educated on colonization and the impacts of colonization before you go, to really understand the dynamic that you're bringing, and to also do a lot of research about the village that you're going to as well. Because there are some villages that are really just seeing dollar signs and trying to turn over as many initiations as they can. And when you do this, you're contributing to like the economic disparity in the country, and it's a very complex dynamic. And so I recommend getting a guide who's spent a lot of time there and understands who's safe, but also who's coming from their heart. And that's important so that we can show up and do our role in a respectful and honoring way to them.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. Thank you for that. I know you can't share too much about the experience. Is there anything you can share about something that Iboga taught you during your journey with it?
Yeah, the biggest thing was about placing people and concepts and institutions on a pedestal. It really showed me that we're all here on equal footing. We have different journeys, but everybody's got wisdom and knowledge, and that honoring what's coming up for you, as long as it's not imposing on somebody else in an invasive boundary crossing way, it's important to honor what your experience is and listen to your intuition. Sometimes the intuition that we have goes against our surroundings and what other people are wanting from us, but you got to listen to it. It has to come up and be acknowledged.
It definitely sounds like some Iboga wisdom right there. Yeah, beautiful.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing. How can people support your work? Is there a way to work with you? Yeah, tell us about everything that you have going on around how people connect with you and work with you.
My website is innervisionibogaine.com, and people can contact me, Juliana at innervisionibogaine.com. There's also a form on my website you can fill out to get in touch with me. And I'm available for pre and post Ibogaine work. And also, if you have any kind of Ibogaine or Iboga related projects, I'm available for consultation on that. I'm on Instagram as Juliana Mu, M-U. You can follow some of what I'm doing on there as well, and on LinkedIn as well.
Amazing. And when's the training going to come out? Do you have a date or?
The date isn't set yet, but it will be ideally starting 6 months from now. I will keep the internet posted on that.
Okay.
Probably,
your website.
I'm not good at gauging time. Probably it'll take longer, but hopefully not.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you so much for coming on. This was such a deep conversation. Like, I think we went beyond the basics of the medicine today. So I know that people listening out there will be grateful for this deep dive.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed this conversation. I love the questions that you asked, and that you have your own experience with Iboga. So I feel like we were able to get into some deeper layers, unknown hidden layers.
Definitely. Thanks so much, Juliana. We'll talk to you guys soon. Thanks for listening.
Bye.
thank you so much for listening to and supporting the show. To stay in touch, sign up for my mailing list, which can be found in the show notes or on modernpsychedelics.net. If this episode sparked something within, please let me know by leaving a review of the Modern Psychedelics podcast on Apple and Spotify. This really helps to share these messages with those who need them, which is the whole reason why I do what I do. And if you haven't already, come join the ongoing conversation over on Instagram with other beautiful souls. We have an incredible and conscious community over at the handle Modern Psychedelics. And don't forget that the work begins after you come back down to earth. And I'm standing shoulder to shoulder, doing it with you.